Welcome to Murder Mondays, a weekly segment where we take a look at some of the most evil killers in history in a comprehensive overview presented in a bite-sized, digestible format. Today we take a look at Aileen Wuornos, a bit of a rarity in the serial killer world as one of the few females. Did Aileen's upbringing and living conditions contribute to her heinous acts, or was she just evil to the core? We'll try to answer that now on tonight's Murder Monday. Aileen Wuornos was born Aileen Carol Pittman on February 29, 1956, in Troy, Michigan, to father Leo Dale Pittman and mother Diane Wuornos, age 16 and 14, respectively. She never met her father, who was incarcerated when she was born and would later go on to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, convicted of sex crimes against children, and eventually would commit suicide by hanging himself in his prison cell a month before her 13th birthday. Aileen, along with her brother Keith, were raised by their grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, who adopted them in 1960 after Aileen's mother abandoned her right before her 4th birthday. The effects of all this neglect and abandonment were rear its ugly head early on, as Wuornos was already engaging in sexual activity in school at the age of 11, in exchange for drugs, food, and cigarettes. This sexual activity would include her being with her own brother. Aileen's grandfather was an alcoholic that would not only beat and sexually assault his own granddaughter, but apparently allow others to do it as well, as at the age of 14 she became pregnant by an accomplice of his after being raped by him. Aileen gave birth to a boy at a home for unwed mothers at about the same time her grandmother died of liver failure, and soon after, at only 15 years of age, Aileen would drop out of school, be kicked out of the house by her grandfather, and begin supporting herself as a prostitute while living in the woods near her old home. On May 27, 1974, at age 18, Aileen was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado for a DUI, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. She would later be charged with failure to appear. In 1976, Aileen hitchhiked to Florida and met 69-year-old yacht club president Louis Fell, quickly marrying him. But within weeks of the marriage, Fell had filed a restraining order against her after she continually got into fights at their local bar and went to jail briefly for assault, hitting him with his own cane. Aileen returned back to Michigan at that point and continued her habit of small-time arrests over assaults and disturbing of the peace, until on July 17, 1976, Aileen's only sibling and brother Keith died of esophageal cancer, granting her $10,000 from his life insurance policy. 4 days later, on July 21st, she had her marriage with Fell annulled after only 9 weeks, and would blow through her brother's life insurance policy on things like drunk driving fines and buying a new car, which she wrecked soon after purchasing it. As the 1980s emerged, Wuornos began upping her criminal profile when on May 20th, 1981, she was arrested in Edgewater, Florida for the armed robbery of a convenience store, having only gotten away with $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. She was sentenced to prison on May 4th of 1982 and released a little over a year later on June 30th, 1983. Less than a year later, she was back at it, first getting arrested for attempting to pass forged checks at a bank in Key West, and then a year later on November 30th, 1985, she was named as a suspect in the theft of a revolver and ammunition in Pasco County. On January 4th, 1986, Wuornos was arrested in Miami and charged with car theft, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice for providing identification with her aunt's name. In the car, police found a .38 caliber revolver and a box of ammunition. On June 2, 1986, Volusia County deputy sheriffs detained her for questioning when a male companion accused her of pulling a gun in his car and demanding $200. She was found to be carrying spear ammunition, and police discovered a .22 caliber pistol under the passenger seat where she had been sitting. Around this time, Aileen met Tyria Moore, a hotel maid, at a Daytona Beach lesbian bar, and the two began a romantic relationship which would feature heavily in the feature film Monster, a 2003 film about the life of Aileen Wuornos, starring Charlize Theron as Aileen, a performance that earned Theron an Academy Award for Best Actress. Aileen and Tyria moved in together, and Wuornos supported them with her earnings as a prostitute. 2 years after moving in with Moore, Aileen Wuornos would commit her first of 7 murders, all done within a period of 12 months, and all men that had picked her up for her prostitution services, whom Aileen claimed had tried to rape her and forced her to kill them in self-defense. Her first victim was 51-year-old Richard Charles Mallory, the owner of an electronics store in Clearwater, Florida, and a convicted rapist. Wuornos shot him several times on November 30th of 1989, and his body was found on December 13th, 2 weeks later, several miles away in a wooded area. Aileen's next victim was 47-year-old David Andrew Spears of Winter Garden, whom she dumped along Florida State Road 19. Next was part-time rodeo worker Charles Edward Carskaddon, age 40, who met the same fate as Aileen's previous 2 victims, having been shot 8 times before having his body dumped. Not even a month later she would strike again, murdering 65-year-old Peter Abraham Seams, a retired merchant seaman who devoted much of his personal time to a Christian outreach ministry. Seams' body was never found, but Wuornos and Moore were seen abandoning his car, and Aileen's palm print was found on the interior door handle of it. Aileen's final 3 victims were Troy Eugene Burris, a 50-year-old sausage salesman from Ocala, Richard Charles Humphreys, a 56-year-old retired U.S. Air Force major and retired chief of police, and finally 62-year-old Walter Gene Antonio, a trucker and security worker, whom Aileen concluded her killing spree with his November 19, 1990 murder. All were shot and dumped in varying locations around Florida. It was the sighting of Aileen and Tyria dumping Seams' car that led to her eventual arrest, when a media campaign was launched with their names and descriptions. Police had located some items of Seams Aileen had pawned and matched her fingerprints to the set they had on file for her previous arrests as well. Aileen was finally caught and apprehended, fittingly, at a biker bar called The Last Resort in Volusia County, with Tyria Moore being found and arrested the next day in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and worked out a deal for immunity in exchange for eliciting a confession from Wuornos. She was put up in a motel and made to call Wuornos with police guidance, pleading to her for help in clearing her name. 3 days later, on January 16, 1991, Aileen Wuornos confessed to the murders, albeit with the caveat that it was all in self-defense and caused by their attempts to rape her. On January 27, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was convicted of Richard Mallory's murder with help from Tyria Moore's testimony. She was sentenced to death. On May 15, 1992, she was given 3 more death sentences for the murders of Humphreys, Burris, and Spears, saying she wanted to, quote, get right with God, admitting that they did not try to rape her, though she maintained that Richard Mallory had in fact tried to. In June 1992, she was given her 5th death sentence for the murder of Carskaddon, and in February of 1993, she pled guilty to the murder of Antonio and received her 6th and final death sentence. No charges were brought against her for the murder of Seams due to his body never being found. Aileen was incarcerated at the Florida State Department of Corrections Broward Correctional Institute, death row for women, then transferred to Florida State Prison for execution. She had an appeal denied in 1996, and in 2001 filed a petition to the Florida Supreme Court, stating her intention to dismiss all pending appeals with these haunting words: I killed those men. Robbed them as cold as ice. And I'd do it again, too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm the one who seriously hates human life, and I would kill again. Aileen Wuornos was executed on October 9th of 2002 at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. She declined her last meal and opted instead for just a cup of coffee. Those that commit heinous acts often point to happenings in their childhood as an excuse, and it often is just that. But I have to say that while nothing could ever justify her later acts, Aileen truly seems to be a case of a young girl who never really stood a chance. She gave a series of interviews shortly before her death and expressed this very sentiment in them, turning to the camera and saying her final recorded words: "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." This has been Murder Mondays. I'll see you next time.